Another very fascinating example is a small fish which is called the stickleback. Now the stickleback builds a nest, a tubular nest in the water. Once the nest is built, it induces one or more females to lay their eggs in its nest. Now once the eggs have been laid, it then guards this nest with the eggs inside. But there's a very intriguing behavioral pattern which it exhibits in the process of guarding the young offspring. What it does, scientists have observed this peculiar pattern. You get periods whereby this fish swims around the nest, and then you get periods which looks remarkably as though the fish were fanning the nest. Now what the fish does, it dips its head down, and while facing the nest, it directs water in towards the nest. This is achieved by moving its fins in a quick and regular rhythm. It continues doing this on a regular basis. Now as the eggs grow larger, the fanning movements grow faster. The fish then goes and creates a number of extra openings in the roof of the nest. This apparently appears to be done in order to make ventilation more efficient. Now, scientists later found out that this pattern of the fish in fanning water towards the eggs and making holes in the roof was absolutely vital for the survival of the young, because these actions actually provided more oxygen for the eggs. And if the fish did not do this, the oxygen supply would have been inadequate, and then the eggs would not have hatched and died. So this fish, in his method of fanning, swimming around, fanning very briskly, making holes in the roof, actually is instrumental in maintaining the survival of his offspring by providing more oxygen. If it had not done these actions, then the oxygen would not have been enough. Then the question arises, what is it that teaches the fish the specific behavioral pattern? How did this fish know that it's got to fan water towards the nest? Or how did it know that it needs to make holes in the roof to allow more ventilation to go through? Scientists cannot explain this phenomena. Their only explanation is instinct. But as we have discussed, this is nothing more than a manifestation of Allah's statement that He has programmed and provided laws and guided all creatures in their life cycles. Another example is the gull, the black-headed gull. These nest in large colonies in dunes on sea beaches. Now, what happens is from the shell, the young hatch, and they move out, leaving the shell behind. Now, these gulls, like many other gulls, quickly, as soon as the baby is hatched, they quickly collect the shells and destroy them or get rid of them or bury the shells so that there are no empty shells lying around. This is an instinctive, as they would say, action. As soon as the young are hatched, the shells are quickly taken and hidden. Now, why does this happen? Scientists later observed this phenomena, and later they found out that this was actually done to reduce the risk of these young birds being spotted by predators. Because the predators, what they do is they look around for the empty shells lying on the seashore. Once they see empty shells, they know that they must be young, not very far off. So these gulls know that they've got to get rid of these shells because the predators are waiting to pick up the young. Another example, just the last example to show this beautiful programmed nature in animals, is that of the cuttlefish. Now the cuttlefish is a type of squid, and this feeds on the shrimps. Now the shrimps, what they do in order to avoid being caught by the cuttlefish, they actually hide themselves in the sand, with the sand covering themselves. So they're actually slightly beneath the surface of the sand so that the cuttlefish cannot see them. Now the cuttlefish is now hunting for the shrimps. So what it does is that it swims very leisurely, just a few inches above the sandy floor. What it then does is to squirt a gentle jet of water at regular intervals through its funnel, and it aims its funnel down on the sand below. This causes the sand to be whirled away and exposes the shrimp. So when the shrimp tries to conceal itself, the cuttlefish immediately sees the movement and catches the shrimp. So we've mentioned these examples, each very different, each amazing in its own right, but all highlight the phenomena which cannot be explained by anything except that Allah has taught these patterns of behavior. There is nothing there to guide the wasp, or the salmon, or the eel, or the wheat ear bird, or the gulls, or the cuttlefish. These are the examples I've mentioned, inexplicable to science. They've observed these behaviors, but they cannot understand why. But as we have noted, Allah has said that it is He who guides these creatures on their respective behavior and life patterns. So we can look and see and learn from these various behavioral patterns of animals.
Right, just to repeat that verse, Surah 20, verse 50, where Allah says, "Our Lord is He who gave everything its nature, then guides them through the life cycle." And we see how beautifully this is illustrated. And these are but very few examples that we have given of the beauty and this wonderful methods which are portrayed by the various insect world itself, which we've discussed. And it goes on to the fish, to the birds, and so on. Let us now go on to look at the world of insects. We find evidence of extremely highly developed nervous system among the insect kingdom. There are insects that raise crops and herd insect cattle, that they milk for a sweet liquid. There are insect architects that construct living quarters so intricately engineered that they achieved year-round weather control. There are insect carpenters, paper makers, slave raiders, soldiers, and undertakers. Amazingly. Some insects, for example, the ants, the bees, and the wasps and termites, they live in social organizations which are considerably more complex than those of human societies. Now the Quran makes reference to these phenomena in the animal kingdom in the verse which I quoted earlier. Surah 6, verse 38. "There is not an animal that lives on the earth, nor a being that flies with its wings, but forms communities like you." Now let us proceed to look at some of these communities with particular reference to those that are mentioned specifically in the Quran. Firstly, with regard to the bees, we are told in Surah 16 verses 68 and 69, "And thy Lord taught the bee to build her cell in hills, on the trees, and in men's habitations, then to eat of all the produce of the earth, and find with skill the spacious parts of its Lord. There issues from within their bodies a drink of varying colors, wherein is healing for men. Verily, and this is a sign for those who give thought, or those who reflect deeply." Now, in the light of this Quranic ayah, let us look at the honeybee and see how they function as a society. Let's reflect as the Quran asks us to reflect and see what the sign is for man. Now the honeybee lives in honeycombs, which are made in cavities in trees, in rocks, and also in man's habitations, because it is partially domesticated, and it's used to produce honey for man in the various bee farms that we know of. Now a honeycomb is made up of multiple cells, which are the basic storage units of the beehive. Now each cell is a perfect six-sided shaped structure called a hexagon. Now a hexagon is the most perfect shape that is suited for the round shape of the bees, while at the same time it is the most effective in economizing labor and wax. A hexagon holds more honey than a triangle or square. Also, it is strengthened because of its contact with neighboring cells. Now, a bee has no knowledge of geometry, nor any way of knowing and comparing the storage capacities of different shaped containers. Therefore, a simple explanation cannot be found for the bee's marvelous and adept architectural skill. It seems that the knowledge of building the structure is ingrained in the bee's nervous system, as we are told in the verse quoted earlier. Thy Lord taught the bee to build her cells in hills, on trees, and in men's habitation. Now the word used is very important. The Quranic word which says Allah taught the bees is wahi. Now wahi means revelation. Revelation which refers to the guidance that has been placed in the bee by way of instinct. And it is the very same word wahi which is used to refer to revelation given to man through the various prophets, from the first prophet Adam to the final prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we find that this revelation is also given to various other creatures apart from man. And Allah uses this word wahi with reference to the revelation given to the bee in order to give her this knowledge to build its cells. And nothing else could describe how beautifully the bees accomplish such a task of architectural mastery. Let us look at the various types of bees that we do have. Now if we look at the honeybee society, we find that the hive comprises of some 65,000 bees which belong to three social ranks. One of them is the queen, who is the mother of all the members of the colony, mind you. The queen is the mother of all the members of the colony. Now a few hundred of these are drones, which are the males, just a few hundred, and the rest, which is more than 64,000, are the workers, which are females. Now the function of the queen and the drones is only reproductive. That is, the queen lays eggs and the drones fertilize the eggs. That is the only function of the queen and the drones. Now the daily work and the care of the colony is the duty of the workers, which are females. And in fact, they don't have much of a reproductive system and they cannot really lay eggs. Now all the work, whether it's collecting of honey, whether it's building of cells, or whether it's all the other functions that are performed by the bees, are done by the worker bees, which are all females. Now let me just refer back to the Quranic ayah which we quoted earlier and see that there is a very important fact which was unknown at the time of revelation and was only realized in recent centuries as a result of our increase in knowledge, where Allah says that Allah taught the bee to build her nest. Now what is important is that the feminine form is used, where the bee is referred to as nahli and referred to as her, as she. Why does Allah refer to the bee as female, as she, the one that builds the nest, the one that collects the honey, as is told later on, the one who shows, Allah guides to show the spacious ways of His Lord and collect the honey and make the honey. Allah refers it specifically in the female form, referring to them as being female. We know today that all the workers, all the bees that fly around collecting nectar and honey, all the bees that are responsible for making the bees' home or the bees' habitation, as the Quran refers to, are all worker bees and all females. And the Quran stated this scientific fact 1400 years ago and has only come to light in the past few centuries. Now, the workers spend their time in a number of duties depending on their age. We find that all the workers pass through all the different functions as they get older. As they're young, they start with one job category, and as they go older, they go on to successive roles and successive job categories. So we find that a worker would do all the different jobs, and there is no hierarchy in the work, such as it does only one specific task, but it does all the various levels of work. Now we find that there are various job categories among the bees. There are domestic workers. These bees keep the hive clean and tidy. There are the nurses, which are responsible to attend to the queen to feed the larvae and the drones. Then we have the engineers, and these are those that are responsible for building such perfect honeycombs. Then we have the weathermen, or the weatherwoman I should say, the weather controllers. These are responsible for keeping the hive cool in summer and warm in winter. Then we have the guards, whose responsibility is to stand at the entrance for protection. And lastly, we have the category of the field workers, and these are the ones which are responsible for gathering pollen, for gathering nectar, for gathering resin, which is necessary to produce the honey, and they are the ones who produce the honey. So these are the various categories of all the workers that are found in the hive. And note that they all are female, and the Quran refers to this 1400 years ago, that these bees are female. This scientific fact has only come to light in the past very recent times, and Allah has declared this 1400 years ago, which only points to the divine origin of the Quran, that this could have come from no other source except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which Allah attests to, that it is He who revealed the Quran and He who has given the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam new knowledge.
Now when you look at the beehive, it always is as they say, a buzz of activity. There is tremendous activity going on in the beehive. Constantly bees coming in, coming out, fluttering at the entrance. There's a constant hive of activity going on in the beehive. They are swarming over the combs. Bees are busy storing honey and pollen. They are caring for the brood. Everything is going on in that one small confined place. But yet, if it appears disordered to us, the converse actually is really true. Because there is very, very specific demarcation of labor, and there's very, very specific tasks which the bees have been assigned to and which they are in the process of fulfilling. So there is no chaos in a beehive. There is very, very strict discipline and order going on there. Let us look at what happens. Now when the eggs are laid, all the eggs, when they are laid, are all similar. The eggs which are destined to produce the queen bee are no different from that which is destined to produce the ordinary worker bees. But what happens? Some of the eggs are taken, those eggs which are destined to produce the queen. The queens, they are taken and placed in a special large cells. They are isolated from the rest of the eggs. In the first 3 days of the eggs being laid, all the larvae which hatch in the first 3 days are fed with what is known as royal jelly. This comes from the glands of the young worker bees. Now what is this royal jelly which the larvae are fed? This is actually a mixture of honey, pollen, and large amounts of vitamins. Now majority of the larvae are then switched. They are no longer fed a royal jelly. They are now fed bee bread, which is actually a mixture of honey and pollen. Now this is for the ordinary larvae which are going to form the worker bees. They are given the royal jelly for 3 days, and thereafter they are switched to bee bread. Now within 6 days of their larvae hatching, their weight increases by 1,500 times, just feeding on this royal jelly and this bee bread. So these larvae that are fed on bee bread go on to produce the majority of workers in the hive. The other larvae which are destined to produce queens, they are continuously fed royal jelly, and this process continues until this larvae develops into queens. Now if you get more than one queen forming, then what happens is you get a fight to the death. These queen bees, 2 or 3 that finally develop, fight until only one queen survives. This is a mortal combat which occurs because there is only one queen bee in every hive. There is not more than one. So this queen bee fights and kills off all the other larvae which would have formed its rival queens. So we now only have one queen bee, which in the process of 6 days has increased its weight by approximately 3,000 times, being fed only royal jelly. Now we got this larvae forming the queen bee, and the other larvae has formed the worker bees. Now what does the queen do? The queen now will mate with one of the drones, that is the male bees. It mates with one of the drones, and all the sperm it now stores in with it. It stores the sperm. This is approximately 4 million sperm cells are stored in her sacs in her body. So she now controls the release of the eggs. You get unfertilized eggs. She will release unfertilized eggs. These will produce the males or the drones. Or fertilized eggs are released from the queen's body, and these will produce the females or the worker bees. Now she may lay as much as 3,000 eggs every day during the month of spring. Now this actually amounts to approximately 2.5 times the weight in eggs of her body. She lays on a daily basis. Now the queen may live for a period of 3 to 5 years. So in effect, she will end up laying eggs for the rest of her life. Now she may produce as much as 1 million eggs in her lifetime. This is the only function which she has. The drones, their only function is to mate with the queen. They do not usually mate with the queens of their own hive, but rather with queens from other hives. Now these drones which are present in the colony, they are normally there in large numbers, fairly large numbers during the months of summer. But when the food supply dries up in the hive, or during the cold winter months, these droves, which is the male bees, are actually dragged out of the colony and left to die, because they have already served their function and there is a scarcity of food. So what happens? The female bees get rid of the male drones and they are left to die. Now we've looked at the larvae which develops into the queen, and the queen's job is to lay the eggs. Let us look at now what happens to the larvae that develops into the workers. Now once these workers develop, they now start their main job. In the first 3 days, their job is specifically to clean the hive. After that period passes, they go on to the next phase of their job, and that is the function as mentioned, that as a nurse. Being a nurse, their job is to bring pollen and honey from the storage cells to feed the drones, the males. The male bees cannot even feed themselves. They are actually fed by the female bees, because the males actually do not have the structures necessary to suck the honey, so they have actually got to be fed. The larvae are also fed by the workers, and the royal jelly is given to the queen. So the workers have got their hands full, because they constantly have to feed not only the queen, not only the drones, but as well as the larvae. And this is indeed a very demanding job, because the larvae need as much as 1,300 meals every day. Now as the workers grow older, now when they are more between 1 to 2 weeks old, their job profile automatically changes. They now go past the stage of being a nurse. They now become builders of the honeycomb, because now they have reached the stage whereby their body can produce wax from glands on its abdomen. Now how this is possible is through a complex process whereby sugar in the honey is converted into wax in the body of the bee. So now the workers have reached the stage where they now build the honeycomb. They chew and they mold this wax into cells and form the honeycomb. They also take care of the cleaning of the honeycomb, and they stand and also guard the entrance of the honeycomb, because now they have reached the stage whereby they have got the sting. That is a defense mechanism which makes them capable of guarding the honeycomb. The male drones cannot even guard the honeycomb because they don't even have any sting. Now after 3 weeks in the life cycle of the workers, they now progress to the last stage of their existence. As I've mentioned, they started off cleaning the hive, then they went on to nursing the young, then they went on to building their honeycombs, then as guards, and now they go on to field workers, depending on their age. This job requires the collection of pollen in their leg baskets, and they collect nectar, which is collected in their honey sacs. This also goes on as they collect resin and water, and this water is vital for cooling the hive, increasing the humidity of the hive, and is also responsible for diluting the honey. Now we will not continue any further with regard to the actual process whereby the honey is manufactured and made, because this itself is a very beautiful and marvelous process. But we've discussed the various cycle of the bee and showed how it goes through the various phases in life, from one stage to another. And the marvel and the beauty of all this is, what is it that guides the bee and tells it exactly what it has to do? This, as you have mentioned before, is nothing more than a manifestation of Allah's grandeur.
So this is all that we have for this week from me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And myself, Assalamu alaikum, and we'd like to invite you all again next week to join us on this fascinating journey of discovery.